You might not know this, but the United States is a magical place. Not only do we have Disney World and Disneyland, but we have psychic diplomats. Now, you might think I'm making this up, but Nikki Haley, the Wicked Witch of the UN, claims to be clairvoyant, as in she can see into the mind of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and with full comprehension know what his plans are. His plans to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and, on the brink of winning the war, of taking back the last province of Syria still under enemy control, he will use banned chemical weapons on his own people, thus bringing down the entire wrath of the US, UK, France, and another coalition of extremely wealthy Western powers on his head. Why would he do this? Only Nikki Haley knows, and she is telling. If somebody uses chemical weapons, we know who it's going to be. Either this is admission of guilt on her part, which is entirely possible, given that the US was behind the last two false flag chemical attacks in Syria, last year in Duma, which turned out not even be a chemical attack. It was just some white helmets, our terrorist movie stars, beloved of George Clooney and other such empty suits, running into a hospital where people were recovering from a building collapse and yelling, "Gas! Gas!" Everyone suddenly thinks they've been gassed. They call it the fog of war for a reason. Nobody knows what the fuck is going on. So that wasn't even really a proper gas attack, and of course the US, never one to wait for independent verification of a international event, just decided to, let's bomb Syria just to be safe. Well, why would we wait for these third-party inspectors with the Office of the Prevention of Chemical Weapons? Why wait for that? Of course, it turned out there was no chemical weapons used, but, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. And then, of course, there was the one year before that, conveniently timed to intersect with Donald Trump's rare moment of lucidity in which he said, maybe this whole Syria thing is not such a great idea. Maybe bring the troops home. And then, whoops, chemical weapons attack! How did Bashar al-Assad have just such terrible timing? He must be a really stupid person, right? That's the only way that he could have possibly stood up to the mightiest military in the world for the better part of a decade when they're doing everything they can to take him out. He must just be really dumb, right? I mean, when you're about to win the war and you do something that the entire United Nations and international law is just against, because, for shits and giggles, you want to scare people, right? That was what the New York Times said. Well, why would Bashar al-Assad use chemical weapons if he's about to win the war? Oh, to terrorize people. Yeah, sure, because he really needs to do that. So, we have Nikki Haley predicting the future, and Bashar al-Assad about to take back Idlib, where, coincidentally, I'm sure this has nothing to do with a pending false flag chemical attack. We have all the Western media outlets, the New York Times, the Independent, CNN, all coming out with these tear-jerking propaganda narratives from civilians trapped in the province of Idlib among the terrorists, who are really nice guys. I mean, they've just gotten a bad rap, these guys that just cut off heads in their spare time. Well, they cut off heads and they make macrame potholders, too. You can't get mad at somebody who makes macrame potholders. He's got to be a good guy. But anyway, so these Idlib people, who are conveniently not given a last name or any sort of identifying information, they say, "Oh, I'm so scared of what's going to happen when Bashar al-Assad and his forces of big meanies come in, and I don't know what I'm going to do because they've cut off our routes of escape, and they let me escape through a humanitarian corridor from where I last was, but, that's just because they wanted to torture me and they wanted to give me a false sense of hope instead of just slaughtering me where I stand like the terrorists would have." I'm not gonna. It's too easy to mock because this is just a transparently false narrative, especially when you have Russian military intelligence coming forward with an extremely detailed narrative that one group of militants trained by a British private security group called the Olive Group, they just rolled into town with 8 barrels of chlorine gas, which they promptly transferred into unmarked containers and hid in a warehouse in rebel-controlled territory. No, that doesn't sound like something's going to happen with that at all. No, they're just doing that. It's just a coincidence that everybody's talking about chemical attacks and these guys from Tahrir al-Sham show up with all this chlorine gas. No, couldn't be anything more than a coincidence. They're plotting something, clearly, and Russia's going around saying, they're plotting something, so don't blame us when this chemical weapons attack happens because they have all this chlorine and clearly they're not just using it to freshen up their pool. And the U.S. said, the Russians are saying it, so it must be lie. I mean, at this point, the reaction to all things Russian is just extremely cartoonish, and the point is that fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, I really must want to be fooled because, You know, they demonize these world leaders they want to take out with a favorite epithet. With Saddam Hussein, it was weapons of mass destruction. With Muammar Gaddafi, it was this whole thing about rape brigades, about giving his soldiers Viagra so they could rape people, I guess rape brigades or something like that. And with Bashar al-Assad, it's gasses his own people. Well, you know, it's hard to maintain a narrative like that when you have absolutely no proof to support it. And when you have independent bodies like the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons coming out and saying, well, you know, there was no actual chemical weapons used here, and no evidence of such, and actually significant evidence that this didn't happen. I mean, there was a bunch of independent journalists went in and said, hey, you know, maybe getting our information from this White Helmets group that is a propaganda organization / terrorist-linked foundation propped up by British intelligence is maybe not such a great idea. Heresy! They almost won an Oscar for Best Documentary. Well, it's best work of fiction, perhaps. I mean, so don't trust the liars to tell you about the impending war crime, because chances are they're the ones committing the war crime. This is another case of that good old-fashioned projection. The U.S. has used chemical weapons in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in a whole lot of places. So many times they can't even count them. I mean, Israel uses white phosphorus in Gaza all the time. But, you know, it's Assad who's using the chemical weapons in Syria. And this, you know, just the double standard is what pisses me off. It's the hypocrisy that pisses me off. If you're going to hold a belief, if you're going to, like, bomb the shit out of somebody for using chemical weapons, bomb the shit out of everyone who uses chemical weapons. Of course, you can't do that because the U.S. regularly uses chemical weapons. But just, like, have a moral code and stick to it. It's not that hard, really. And that moral code should not include lying us into war. So, New York Times, for all your heartfelt editorials about how Trump's attack on the press is an attack on us all, and this is a slip-slide into fascism and murr. Well, for one thing, we've been in fascism for like 20 years now, so like, don't give me that shit. This is, if you're only just now waking up to the whole fascism thing, it's because you were a part of it, and you still are, so stop with this disingenuous bullshit. But also, there's that little fact of you lying us into the Iraq War, which you never apologized for, and I think about 1 million dead Iraqis would really like to hear your apology. So unless you're going to start apologizing to them, and maybe you should apologize to the Libyans too while you're at it, because they had the most developed civilization in Africa, and were really, like, actually bringing the rest of the continent up as well. They had a Pan-African gold dinar that was going to really allow these nations, these poor developing nations, to take some charge of their economy and stop being basically raped by these larger powers, whether it's America or China. They're all just there to get the resources. And Libya actually wanted to help them out because he felt some sort of solidarity with the people of this continent. So we couldn't have that. And so after killing him off, we have now like a chaotic mess where people are actually being sold at slave auctions. And I would say the U.S. media is actually complicit in that too. We sold that war. I guess the point is that if we don't end up staging a false flag in Syria, we still have these aircraft carriers, and we still have these bombers over there, and we still have an administration that is so thirsty for blood that no matter how many school buses the Saudis blow up in Yemen, it's still not enough. All the starvation in the world we inflict upon those people. I mean, I think it's like, 18 million people are now at risk of dying of starvation because of the utterly against international law siege of Hodeidah, which, once again, you will not hear mentioned in the Western media because it is our boys doing the besieging. Yeah, the bloodthirsty neocons are not satisfied with this mere starvation thing or this mere blowing up school buses thing. They want a full-on war, and they won't stop until they get it. So John Bolton has promised his buddies in the MEK Iran. And that he said that would happen before, I think, February 2019, what would have been the 40th birthday of either the Shah or the Ayatollah, I don't remember which. Somebody's 40th birthday equals death and destruction for Iran. So I feel like if maybe so many people are paying attention because of the Russian intelligence warnings, that they're just going to take all those weapons of war they've amassed in that area and turn them on Iran. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to pull something in Iran with all of this talk about Iranian bots colonizing Facebook and buying ads and whatnot. This is the prelude to war, man. This is just like back in the day, you would try to demonize your enemies by making them out to be something less than human. We're trying to say, oh, all Iranians are bots, or all Iranians are like fake personae trying to fool you into voting for the wrong dude on election day. So this is transparent war propaganda, and I would say keep your eyes out for some sort of provocation, some sort of false flag related to Iran while everyone's eyes are on Syria. So, why is the US doing this? Why are we staging yet another false flag attack when the last one was so, threadbare and completely unbelievable? Well, for one thing, they don't want the Syria to be reconquered by Assad, because then that gets rid of our rationale for being there in the first place, which was theoretically to defeat ISIS. Now, Nikki Haley, perhaps presciently, because remember, she's clairvoyant now, realized that maybe what happens if we actually do defeat ISIS, and then what, we have to leave Syria? I don't know about that. I mean, that pipeline, all that oil, I don't know. So she came up with this rationale that as long as there are Iranians there, who happen to be there on the invitation of Assad and the Syrian government, so they're like invited guests. We're like the party crashers who show up and like shit in the sink, and we wipe our asses with the bed sheets, and we break all the fine china, and then we still won't leave. It's like 6 a.m, and the parents are coming home the next day, and Bashar al-Assad is like, dudes, get out of here, man. I gotta clean up. I'm gonna get in trouble. And Americans are just like, party! And then pee in a closet on their mother's fur coat, and this just makes a big mess. We're not supposed to be here. We need to get out. But no, Iranians first, of course. That makes perfect sense. The Iranians are passed out on the couch or something, and they're minding their own business. And the U.S. is drawing a dick on their forehead. And, I mean, this metaphor is getting very sloppy, but you get the point. I mean, we're not supposed to be here. Syria doesn't want us here. The entire world, if they had a chance to express themselves without having to worry that the U.S. would bomb them into the Stone Age, doesn't want us here. How does it feel to be an international pariah? I mean, we're supposed to be the good guys. We're supposed to be the world police. We are the war criminals. We are the monsters. I hate being ashamed of my country. This country was founded on, good ideals. The whole idea of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. We don't have any of that shit anymore, man. Now we're a fucking police state. And, I want my money back. I want my fucking bait and switch life back. This is absurd. And we're taking the rest of the world down with us. It's gonna be a fucking nuclear holocaust. I think I give it maybe 5 years before the petrodollar is toast, but probably gonna be quicker than that. I mean, we've all been ripped off. We should be much more angry than we are. We should not be sitting by idly and taking this. Fuck you, ruling class, and the fucking horse you rode in on. Give us our country back, bitch!